Well, today we're working on the neck of this acoustic guitar, the rough construction of the neck. And the first thing I want to do is mark a very shallow angle for a scarf cut. And the cutoff piece will be glued in such a way that it will be angled back and it will form the headstock for the guitar where the tuning pins go. A shallow cut like this across the thickness of the board is called a scarf joint. I made a jig for the bandsaw so that I could run the piece through at the precise angle I wanted, not risk my fingers. I cut this very, very slowly. It's sped up for the video, but I cut it exceptionally slowly to get as smooth a cut as possible. And there's the two pieces. And you can see how shallow that angle is. And now you'll see how the piece, how that shallow angle allows this piece to flip over and become an angled headstock. There's the cut. And we now just rotate this piece around, glue it on the back, and presto, one angled headstock at 15 degrees. We'll clamp the pieces back to back and do some planing, quite a bit of planing actually, planing and sanding and checking for level and squareness. We want these two angled surfaces to be flush, in other words in the same plane. And there was quite a bit of planing and sanding. I'm not very good with a hand plane, so it took me a while to get this the way I wanted it. I did finally get it pretty smooth, as you can see. At least close enough. And you can see how, again, how the piece flips over and becomes the angled headstock on the back. Yep, looks good. If it looks like I'm fussing around a lot with this particular joint, it's because this is one of the most important joints on the guitar, and it's important that those pieces be flush, and so we have a nice flat gluing surface. At the other end of the headstock blank, I'm going to cut a few blocks off, a 4-inch block, a 3-inch block, and a 2-inch block, and those will get stacked up to become the heel of the guitar. The heel is at the end of the neck where the neck joins the guitar body itself. You stack all these up and glue them together, and then they'll get carved into a nice curved shape. And this is how they'll be glued in the configuration that you see here. Well, after glue up, I can take the clamps off. A lot of clamps to make sure the joint is really secure. Now we'll work on this joint for the headstock. Gluing that is a bit of a challenge because it's at an angle, and so when that joint is wet with glue and you try to clamp it together, it wants to slide out of alignment. So it's important to line it up the way you want it, and then clamp some stop blocks to your workbench so that when you put the clamps on that wet glue joint and it tries to slide, it can't go anywhere. And anytime you're doing a glue up, but especially a tricky one like this, it's a good idea to do a dry fit. And so I'll take this apart as if I'm putting glue on it, and then I'll practice putting it back together here so that when I get the joint wet with glue, I don't have any challenges putting it back in. I will have done it a couple of times. It looks like that fits pretty good. And next up, we'll pull this apart and actually put the glue on it. And I'm going to squeeze some glue on here, and then you'll be interested to see the very high-tech tool that I use to spread the glue around. Normally, for a glued wood joint, I like to put glue on both mating surfaces, but it's difficult to put glue on the other piece because it's clamped to the workbench. So I'll put a little extra glue on this side of the joint, and there'll be plenty. And I'll know I got enough glue on the joint if, when I clamp it together, I get a little bit of glue squeeze out at the edges. And that squeeze out can be wiped up, or you could let the glue dry and then scrape it off later. And because I practiced, it's easy to slide this right in while the glue is wet. No problems, no delays. And I did get some squeeze out of glue, so I know I got enough glue in the joint. Clean up what I can now before I put the clamps on. And then any dried glue that's left later after we pop the clamps off, I can scrape off with a chisel or sand off. Eventually used 5 clamps on this joint. It's a rectangular joint, so I put 1 in each corner and then I put 1 in the middle. As I said, one of the most important joints in the whole guitar, so it's important that you get plenty of clamps, get good glue coverage across the whole joint, and get good pressure across every square centimeter of the joint. And there's the 5th clamp. Now we wait. Well, the next day I could take the clamps off. And this is what I ended up with. The wax paper keeps the glue squeeze out on the bottom from gluing the whole thing to the workbench. One rough guitar neck. A little more tuning of the angled surface to be sure that it's flush and square. There's a lot more planing, a lot more sanding, a lot more checking for squareness. And that's the neck at this stage. The next operation will be to route a channel down the center of the guitar neck to hold a truss rod. And a truss rod is a couple of pieces of metal with a bolt at one end that allows you to angle the neck to the body. It helps you compensate for when moisture causes the neck to bow backwards or forwards. And this is a process of cutting a very shallow channel down the center of the neck, and then raise the bit a tiny bit, cut another channel, raise the bit a tiny bit, cut it again. And you do this several times as we sneak up on the final depth, which should be just flush with the top of the truss rod. And this looks pretty good. I'll check it with a straight edge to be sure. And it looks good at that end. Pretty good at that end. So there's the neck with the channel routed in it, and here's the truss rod laying across. Truss rod installed, and that's what it looks like from the end. I think it did okay.